Hello, and welcome to this tutorial on how to hand baste in a very quick and easy way. This is a demonstration that goes with a little guide I have called 10 Techniques for Garment Construction. And hand basting is easily one of the most impactful sewing techniques, specifically hand sewing techniques, that I think you'll ever use whilst making clothes. Once you know how to do it properly, and this is the key, it makes life a lot easier in terms of fitting things and sewing things in the machine. You will not go back, or at least not use pins quite as much once you learn how to do this properly. All you need to do this really well is basting cotton, which I'll talk about more in a moment, and a milliner's sewing needle, which I'll discuss again, and then you'll just have whatever fabric that you're using to execute the technique for your sewing project. So this is an example of how it looks once you've done it, and I'll now cut back or rewind it a moment or two to show you how I got to this point. So here's a reel of basting cotton, and you always want to baste with cotton for this. You don't want polyester because you want thread that is strong, but thread that you can also break relatively easily. You can, if you want to, use sewing cotton if that's what you're going to use for your project. I always use sewing cotton, and sometimes I do baste with it. But with this basting cotton in particular, it's strong, but you can also snap it like that. So if you need to unpick the thread really quickly, because basting is a temporary stitching technique, you want to be able to snap it. And it doesn't take much. I'm just going to break it again like that. It's pretty easy to break, but it will do the job that you need it to do. Usually this will be labelled as basting cotton. This is a really old reel with no make on it, but I tend to prefer Gutermann threads for my projects, but any make of basting cotton will be fine. The main thing is that you can snap it really easily. Polyester thread, do not try to snap that because it's plastic, and plastic is really hard to tear. Always baste with cotton thread that is specifically for basting. If you're basting by machine rather than by hand, as I'm going to show you in this video, then you can just set the machine to a longer machine stitch. So this is going to be around 4 millimeters in length, at the very least, so that the stitches are big enough for you to rip out with the unpicker. And basting by machine, it's fine. You don't need to thread up your machine with this, and I actually recommend that you don't. Basting cotton is generally, in my view, just specifically for hand basting only, and that's what I'm going to use with my millinery needle here to demonstrate the technique. So with hand basting, it's important to discuss the kind of needles that you use. I've zoomed in really tightly so that you can compare these two hand sewing needles side by side. So this one here at the top is a regular sized sewing needle. I would say, I'll just get a ruler, that it is about 3.5 centimeters altogether. And a lot of hand sewing needles will be this length, but for hand basting, I'm going to ask you to leave these alone because these are not the best ones for the technique. They'll do the job of a needle, but this longer one here will do much better. And this one is specifically a millinery needle. So you can get these in various makes. These ones are John James. They're available from a few places in the UK. I live in London and got mine from McCulloch and Wallace, which is up in central London in Soho. But other manufacturers are available. I don't do any affiliate marketing. These are just what I have. You can see that I've used a few from the packet already, and this in my palm here is one. So the main thing is the length of the needle, because as you'll see with the technique, it's all about loading up the needle with as much fabric as you can. So bearing in mind that this previous one was about 3.5 centimeters long, this millinery needle here is just under 5 centimeters long. So, very nearly double. And it makes a huge difference to the technique. The other thing that this is really good for is, its strength. I don't know if any of you watching have ever done hat making or picked up any hats, but you'll know that the materials they use to make hats like cinnamon and buckram are really not very soft at all. So what this means is that millinery needles are a lot stronger than regular sewing needles. And this is wonderful news if you need to baste together really thick layers of fabric, or if you're making a coat. You don't have to worry about the needle bending out of shape and breaking. All millinery needles will be of particular reinforced steel anyway, especially compared to regular sewing needles. But I was recommended to use these by milliners themselves. So I trust them. It has worked really well for me with my sewing projects. And so this is what I encourage you to get. Most of them will come in a pack either like this of different lengths, or they'll be all one length. I just got this kind of multi-pack because I wanted to have the choice. But even the smallest one in this pack is longer than the piddly little sewing needle I've got here. So millinery needles, whatever make you can get, so long as it's a millinery needle. And that is all you really need apart from basting cotton. And I'll just pick that up in a moment and show you what difference is between that and regular thread. Okay, so I'm all set and I'm all threaded. I've got my millinery needle threaded up, and I'm just using a double thickness of basting thread just because I want the contrast to be really good on screen for you. You can use single thread, of course, for the same technique. It will work absolutely fine. Again, whether you use a single or double thread really depends on the thickness of the layers you're stitching together, or basting together rather, and how firm you need the stitching to be. So we're all threaded, and the main thing with this technique is that you're considering which is the most flexible out of the three things involved here. We've got a steel needle, you've got your hands, and you've got the fabric. Now, what most people do with hand sewing is take techniques that are used in embroidery, where they go into the fabric. I'm just going to go like this, and then they pull the thread through and then draw the needle miles and miles and miles away, like I have done here. And that is fine if you're embroidering, because you want to be able to manipulate the thread. It needs to often lie in a particular way when you're doing stitches like French knots and what have you that are really important to execute without, say, twisting the thread around or the floss if you're embroidering. But hand basting is a completely different animal. We want very compact movements that are not going to take too much time and energy. And we're going to use, instead of using our hands to take back the needle miles and miles away, we're going to manipulate the fabric. And this allows us to mimic the spotting technique that we use at the sewing machine so that we can stitch in a straight line. So what this looks like is that we bring our needle into the fabric. So I'm just going to put it here by the seam line. And then instead of taking my hand back miles away like I've done, what I'm going to do is to just load the fabric onto the needle. So I'm just going to trace a path of stitching back and forth. And I'm watching the distance of between the needle and this seam line, just as I would do if I was at the sewing machine. So I'm trying to maintain an even distance, or as consistent a distance as possible. And when I load up the fabric onto the needle, you can see that I've got this concertinaed effect here. You've got these ripples which are going back and forth, back and forth. And so what you're doing is folding the fabric over and over the needle point to create that zigzagged effect. And all the while, if we just look where my right index finger is here, I'm trying to keep as consistent as possible from that seam edge. So I'm watching that, and moving the fabric means that I keep still. And just like when you're sewing, it means the more you keep your head still and your body still, the more likely you are to be straight and not go off track. So at this point, you can see why I've recommended a longer needle for you, because you can actually load up quite a lot of fabric on here. I'm just going to see if I can squeeze another one on just to really underline the point. And so it doesn't take very long for you to get really far with the technique. You can cover a lot of distance very quickly, and the size of the stitch is governed by how much you fold the fabric at this stage. So I'm just about got the needle full up. This is about as much as I can get on there so that I can hold it. I'm just going to push it through So you might want to use a thimble for this. I tend to use my fingernail, but don't be uncomfortable. And I'm going to just pull or draw that needle through the fabric. And you can see that technique is really efficient, and the stitches are all pretty even, and they're a fairly consistent distance from the seam line that's just above the line of running stitches that I've created. So I'll just do that again. I'm just going to pull a bit more yarn through, and I'm just going to pick up the fabric. I'm just going to stab the needle in, that is, and then we're just sort of seesawing the needle back and forth, creating folds of fabric. So we're going in and out, and in and out, and in and out, and in. Just going to push the needle further, and out, and in, and one more. I've gone off the seam, but it doesn't matter. And so again, the needle's just been loaded up. I can then push it through all the layers of folded fabric that I've got onto my nice long millinery needle, and then pull it through the remainder of that seam. Okay. And that is how you execute hand basting. You can see that it's relatively neat. I kept the movements compact, so it's really efficient. It's pretty accurate. And if you want to take more care than me, this can even be a guideline for stitching at the machine. If you're doing something like an edge stitch or a top stitch, this would be great. So you don't have to draw on the fabric at all. You can just have it held in place by the stitching you've got here. And the other bonus with hand basting that a lot of people overlook is that you don't need to use pins. And what that means is that both your hands are free to concentrate on guiding the fabric through the sewing machine. So rather than if I turn the fabric in such a way that it would be passing through the sewing machine like this, instead of having to stop and start with one hand or the other and remove pins and stop and go, remove the pins, start, stop and go, instead I can just do a long pass of the seam. I can do it really relaxed, knowing that I don't have to stop and remove any pins. And so having both hands free to control the fabric is a massive, massive game changer, because for all this time you might have felt that you're not good at sewing, or you can't control the fabric, and it might just be that you just need to use both hands. Not all of us can control it with one hand. There are some people who do and who can. I am not always one of them, for sure. I definitely prefer to have both hands on the fabric, and basting gives you that gift of freedom. It's so much easier for you to sew really well and really accurately if you've got both hands to control the fabric. So if you haven't tried this before, I encourage you to try it for that reason, especially if you've taken so much time pinning something in place really nicely. It's perfect by the time you get it to the machine, and then you're absolutely racked with nerves trying to stop the thing in the right place so that you can remove the pin and not dislodge everything that you spent so much time pinning in place. Just baste it. It's really quick. You saw that this took seconds. I mean, probably about the amount of time it takes Usain Bolt to run 200 meters, pretty much, if he was still running. But you get the idea. And, you've got your long needle, you've got your thread, you've got a really simple technique that you can use on any fabric. You don't have to worry about whether it's silk or if it's, gauze or cotton, denim, linen even. You can do this. It works for any fabric at all. So there you have it. That's how to hand baste. This is the quickest technique I know how. I hope that it makes sewing garments much easier for you in future. If you haven't tried this before, I'd love it if you could comment below and let me know how you get on. Give this video a like if you find it really helpful and you think it will help other sewists too. Otherwise, have a lovely day, and I will see you another time.